Now, I just want y'all to see a sister reads. we do read around here, okay? So these are, I'm not just a Googler. This is my favorite secular book. As you know, I'm a Bible believer, and although I do not refer to myself as a Christian, now these are just some books in relation to the Bible that I have. These are just I've always liked history books and books and related to history, and like this right here, the Hebrew New Testament. There are those who believe that the New Testament, there are some people who believe it was written in the white man's language, and but there's some information and evidence showing that the original scripts actually were not, or may not have been. And this is a book here, checking out the name Negro, its origin and its evil use. Okay, so just so you know. All right, we do read here. Okay, so I'm not just a person who learns through Google, or just I see like a documentary, a YouTube documentary or a popular documentary, and I love documentaries. Those are my favorite type of films. But these are just some of the books that I have, so that you can know that I am a person. We do read around here. Okay, just so you can know that. Okay, this is from the Hidden Hebrews.
This whole idea of creating a mulatto caste is designed to create a buffer between the whites and the blacks. You give more privileges to this mulatto caste.
We do know that white races have been doing such tactics and keeping people divided. And yes, they have tried to create buffer classes. This is not necessarily blaming biracials, but there were those mulattoes who did feed into that. That's a fact. This isn't taking it out on biracials and mixed people in general, but there were those, especially if we're going to talk about the Latin American countries. Just like when we talk about what led to the warring in Rwanda, sadly, this led to a lot of innocent Watutsi people being killed. But what happened? White colonialists put the Watutsi people in positions of power, even though they were the minority. They put these people, the Watutsi, in positions of power over the Hutu and Twa people, and the Hutu being the majority, making up the majority, having more Bantu features, whereas the Watutsi, they were taller, had narrower features. So they claimed that the Watutsi, just because they were taller with narrow features, they said they were closer to Caucasian, Black Caucasians. They put them, this minority group, in positions of power over the majority, or giving them privilege, Watutsi privilege, over the masses of people, and the masses reacted. Sad to say, there were many innocent lives lost, but this is what happened. This is the shit they do. This is factual. This doesn't mean that every Watutsi person was an oppressor or whatever, but there were those who were participants. That's a fact.
Chancellor Williams, in his book, he was claiming that due to a biracial population which came about from Greek mixing with the indigenous African population there, it rose up another army which fought against their African mothers and fathers.
In Africa, when the Europeans came in, the Portuguese would mate with the Africans, and their offspring would be called Lancados. And the Lancados were the offspring of Africans and Europeans. And what happened was the Lancados, the mixed offspring of the Europeans and the Africans, they became slave traders themselves because, again, a lot of biracial children would take on the ideology of the father. So whenever you see people talk about, well, Africans sold other Africans, this is really who they're talking about.
Divide and conquer tactics. So let's talk about the Lancados for a moment. Now, was Tariq Nasheed talking about? Now, this is from thefinalcall.com. Did African slave traders sell us out? This is a Nation of Islam site, finalcall.com. One of the most unseemly manifestations of Black self-hatred is the often violently held belief that 500 years ago, Africans sold other Africans into centuries of slavery. It is heard most often when a Negro feels the need to shield whites and Jews from having to answer for their dominant role in the Black Holocaust. It was Blacks who sold other Blacks, says the Negro. So we cannot hold whites responsible for a crime. And yeah, and it's funny when they try to use that, and when we're talking about reparations and stuff. But yet, what is it? Was it Blacks that continued for 4 centuries the brutal act of not of slavery, chattel slavery, and really some of the most brutal things happened post slavery, i.e., Red Summer, the massacre of Black Wall Street. The most brutal things, a lot of the most brutal things happened post slavery, actually. But anyways, okay, and by that suspect reasoning, they dismiss out of hand 500 years of the most brutal and murderous history the planet has ever known. It is impossible to imagine a Jewish person saying anything similar. Only Blacks seem to have adopted a strange psychosis that exculpates the white perpetrator and blames the Black victim. But this internecine scapegoating wholly depends not just on a colossal ignorance of the historical facts, but on the sleight of hand deceptions of white historians who seek racial advantage, not historical clarity. One must look very carefully at the charge of Black participation in the African slave trade. And as always, the very best place to start is with the Elijah Muhammad. He described the method used by the European in his genocidal pursuit of free Black labor. He goes into foreign lands of our people, and the first thing he goes looking around for with his green blue eyes, just to get up to, is the woman, so that he can leave the seed of the devil there. The first 15th century Portuguese excursions into Africa prove the messenger to be absolutely correct. The Portuguese explorers used forced breeding on the Africans, a tactic which targets the genetic foundation of the indigenous population. European invaders deliberately created mixed race subgroups with the intent of using them to capture and enslave the native populations. This new breed would serve as a ruling class to control the massive numbers of African slave laborers required by the colonies, and further serve as a buffer zone between the white oppressor and his Black victims. In America, we have come to know them as house niggas or mammies or Uncle Toms, and they were most often the lighter skinned slaves, the children born of the rape of the Black women. Back in Africa, the horrific suffering and debasement of the Black woman had a very specific economic purpose. Okay, so you see here, okay, they have an image here of Jewish police force called the Judenrat. Okay, and it says here, once they muscled into monopoly positions in trade, the Lancados brought in European weapons to foment strife and wars between African tribes. This led to massive disruptions of African societies and the displacement of whole populations as the transfer of captives, fueling the traffic in African human beings. Okay, all right. That sounds like something whites who are racist and in positions of power would do. But I got to make some corrections on this, okay? Who are the Lancados actually? Okay, now if you look at Wikipedia, get your wiki quickie. The Lancados, okay, Lancados, or it means literally the thrown out ones or the cast out ones, were settlers and adventurers of Portuguese origin in Senegambia, Cabo Verde, Guinea, Sierra Leone, and other areas on the coast of West Africa. Many were Jews, often new Christians, escaping persecution from the Portuguese Inquisition. Lancados often took African wives from local ruling families, securing protection and advantageous trading ties. They established clandestine trading networks and weaponry, spices, and oftentimes enslaved people, which angered the Portuguese crown by disrupting its ability to collect taxes. Okay, so you believe that, right? Y'all, do y'all believe that? Sound like the Lancados, well, they were from Portugal. They came out of Portugal into Africa. Okay, you believe that these were white people or mixed people? Okay, but let's look further. Okay, Okay, I ain't got this book here, but let's read from The Evolution of Portuguese Identity, Luso-Africans on the Upper Guinea Coast from the 16th to the early 19th century. Okay, and this is by Peter Mark. Okay, this is from 1999, the Journal of African History, published by Cambridge University, page 173. Let me read here. During the late 15th and early 16th century, Portugal established a trading presence along the Upper Guinea coast from Senegal to Sierra Leone. Immigrants from Portugal, known as Lancados, some of them Jews, seeking to escape religious persecution, settled along the coast, where many of them married women from local communities. By the early 16th century, Luso-Africans, or Portuguese as they called themselves, were established at trading centers from the Petite Côte in Senegal south to Sierra Leone. Descendants of Portuguese immigrants, of Cape Verde Islanders, of West Africans, the Luso-Africans, developed a culture that was itself a synthesis of African and European elements. Rich historical documentation allows a case study of the changing ways Luso-Africans identified themselves over the course of 3 centuries. The earliest Lancados established themselves along the coast as commercial middlemen between African and European traders, and as coastal traders between Sierra Leone and Senegambia. That's all I can get from that source. Okay, but when you type in Lancados, okay, this is what shows here. Okay, just some images I'm seeing. Okay, type in Lancados. Where are these Lancados? How did they actually look? Were they Caucasian Portuguese? Let's just read a little more. But who are these Jews in Portugal? Okay. You got to understand. See, I go to older sources. I go to older sources. Well, here's a site here, blackhistoryinthebible.com. Okay. Some Lancados were mulattoes and black. So is Tariq Nasheed a final call site? Are they right in what they're saying in regard about the Lancados? See, the Lancados, also known as Sephardic Jews. Now when we think of Sephardic Jews, okay, we're going to think of today, like we're going to think of, remember the movie The Fly? Jeff Goldblum. Now, usually those who are referred to as Jews today, usually we think, like I think about like 90%, over 90% are those who are referred to as Ashkenazi, like those of Western Europe, like Germany and Poland, and then you have those of Iberia, Spain and Portugal, and some of North Africa, who may be referred to as Sephardim, and they represent like under 5%, I believe, of those who refer to themselves as Jews today. Okay, like Jeff Goldblum, the actor, from the movie The Fly. He kind of got, somewhat dark-skinned eyes, hair is kind of curly. Let me do a quick correction, because I've just found out that Jeff Goldblum actually is considered a person of Ashkenazi Jewish descent. He just has a more Mediterranean look. And I thought I heard him being referred to as being of the Sephardi. But people probably assume this because, like I said, he has a more Mediterranean look. He kind of got somewhat dark-skinned eyes, hair is kind of curly. Is that how they look? Is that how they... Well, let's keep reading. The Lancados, also known as Sephardic Jews or Spanish and Portuguese Jews, were definitely banished to the west coast of Africa. This source confirms that many of them were black, some were mixed, and some were the same. Why are they being referred to now as mixed, though? But let's go to older sources. Y'all got to understand, things have changed. See, I like going to older sources. But yeah. Let's just check out a little bit of this. What went on? And understand, I am a Bible believer. I'm not a Christian, although I do believe the New Testament to be truth, but I'm not part of the Christian religion, but I do believe in Yahushua HaMashiach, who is known as Jesus Christ. This is from, by the way, the Hidden Hebrews, part 4. Let's just learn a little history on Spain and Portugal. And see, we got to know something about the Spanish Inquisition, because it gives you an understanding of the Middle Passage, the transatlantic slave trade. You'll have a better understanding of what really happened.
In 1492, Spain commanded all its Jews to get out. The Jews were commanded to leave the kingdom of Spain. In fact, Spain gave Judah 3 choices: leave Spain, convert to Roman Christianity, or to be put to death. The following reference reads, in the meantime, Ferdinand had made great slaughter of the Moors.
And you notice in Portugal, they're always referring to the Jews and the Moors. Now, I've shown y'all, for y'all who don't know, check out my video that I've uploaded recently, or it's actually a re-upload. Okay, I brought it over here. Moors, Black, a Berber. Okay, yeah, check that out. Yeah, the Moors were Black, racially speaking. But also, you notice they'll refer to the Moors and the Jews in Portugal, the Moors and the Jews. But then they'll refer to the Portuguese separately. But then they'll talk about the Moors and the Jews as if they're separate from the Portuguese. Now, we know that the Moors was Black. Moor, synonymous Negro. Remember when the Latino Puerto Rican hip-hop legend Crazy Legs of the Rocksteady Crew, he referred to hip-hop as that Moreno thing? But then you'll notice in the United States, the Moors are described separately from the Negroes, however. But we know that they were Black. We know the Moors were Black. But they talk about the Portuguese, and then they talk about the Moors and the Jews of Portugal, as if they're a separate group of Portuguese people. But anyways,
the following reference reads, in the meantime, Ferdinand had made great slaughter of the Moors, and at last entirely subdued them in the kingdom of Granada.
Like somebody posted, oh, the Moors didn't have that much power. No, the Moors ruled over Iberia, Spain, Portugal, and had a lot of power even in certain parts of Italy. Okay, and Moors, that's just the old term for Black. Okay, these in particular, however, were of the Islamic faith. All right, so I think that may be the differentiation. I do wonder if they come from a different line of people, like Ham or Shem, but they were Black. But you know, the white people, perhaps descendants of Visigoths, Turks, and you know, they came to power. And this was a power that they had. It took some time, going back to the Crusades, going back to like the 11th century. That was like the beginning, but they were still in the Middle Ages, because from the time of 711, you hear that term 711, up until around 1492, the Moors, that's why they call it the Dark Ages, even though they now use the term Middle Ages or medieval times. Okay, you had the Moors who were in positions, who were in power. Okay, you had Black people in power in particularly Spain and Portugal. But there was also those who were referred to as Jews in Spain and Portugal. But who were they? All right. Oh, and what he's reading from, all right, so you can know this ain't just Afrocentric sources, since y'all don't trust us. Okay, this is a book from 1731, The History of the Inquisition, Philippus van Limburg. All right, that's what he's reading from. And this is the page. The page is 127. All right.
The following reference reads, in the meantime, Ferdinand had made great slaughter of the Moors.
Ferdinand, Caucasian. Okay. Moors, Black.
And at last entirely subdued them.
And at last, okay, because from the year 711 AD up until around 1492, around that time. Why do you think white folks love the year 1492? And they'll tell you that's when Columbus is discovered America and all that. There's a reason white folks love that year 1492. And that was also that led to the beginning of the Renaissance. So the Renaissance meaning rebirth, like the rebirth of Rome, for instance. You'll understand why. Okay, that's why you need to know the Bible. Also, it's history. It's not a fairy tale. This is history, y'all. That's why in Spain. Hold on. I know. I just keep talking, but y'all think this is the KKK costume? Nope, it's not the KKK. This is Holy Week. But is it a coincidence? Is it a coincidence that these suits look like this? Is there any connection with this Holy Week and the Ku Klux Klan? Is there any connection? You know that's not no coincidence. Why do you think in Spain they dress up, they have this little celebration? They also in the Netherlands, but like in Spain where they dress up, like they celebrate how they got rid of the Moors. Now they'll tell you you don't look like the ones that they'll call Arab today. And again, let me tell y'all again, Arabia, Arab meaning mixture, mixed company. Arab comes from where Arab, it could be spelled EREB or EREV, because like in Spanish, B and V can have interchangeable sounds. Okay, mixture, mixed company. See, Arab is mixed. But yeah, why you think they dress like now? They'll tell you in Spain, oh, this is how a Moor looks. Is this the origin of blackface even? They're pretending to be Moors. And there are people in the Netherlands who protest, like with the Zwarte Piet and, little celebrations and stuff. Yeah, because see, these were the people who dominated Spain. And so they celebrate how they, I guess, kicked their asses and kicked them out of Spain and Portugal. You probably go to Spain telling them that a Moor look like Jeff Goldblum, or what y'all want to claim a Berber is today. They probably, you try to tell them that they look like some Pakistani guy at the corner store, they probably laugh at you. They know how Moors look. These are exaggerations, true that, but obviously they were black, very black, and obviously this is the origin of blackface. But anyways,
in the meantime, Ferdinand had made great slaughter of the Moors, and at last entirely subdued them in the kingdom of Granada, having reduced the city of Granada itself into his power, and therefore to purge their kingdoms entirely of the Jewish superstition.
Judaism.
Ferdinand and Isabel, by a law, drove the Jews out of Spain.
Okay.
To whom, however...
So they were driven out of Spain, went into Portugal. Okay. Portugal, the neighbor.
After a long consultation of the wise men, was granted the space of 4 years, within which they were either to convert to the Catholic faith or sell their effects. And it reads, when the time was elapsed, they who persisted in their religion were forced to depart with their wives, their children, servants, families, and effects, and forbid ever to return into Spain, where if they were ever found, they were to be immediately punished with death and confiscation of goods.
Now understand, there was this like purge even before that in other European countries of these particular groups of people. I wonder how those people look. But the final purge in Europe of these interesting people, the final purge was around 1492.
Skipping ahead. The Jews thus driven from Spain fled for the most part into Portugal and obtained from King John, under certain conditions, that they might live there for a certain season. The conditions were chiefly these, that everyone should pay to the king 8 pieces of gold and leave Portugal within a limited time, and forfeit their liberty if they exceeded it, or in other words, if they stayed too long. So we see the Jews left the kingdom of Spain and fled into Portugal.
You see, look, Africa's right here, right? North Africa, like Morocco and, named after Moors, Morocco and all that. Okay, and Algeria. And North Africa is right here. You see how close proximity, and you got France over here also. But you got Spain and then fled into Portugal. Now, you learn in high school, you learn in school that the Portuguese were the ones who started the transatlantic slave trade. Ain't this what you learn in school? That it was initially the Portuguese and the Spanish, and it was years later on that the English got involved. But the Portuguese, the Spanish, that's who you first learn. There's reason for this. Okay.
And notice the size of the kingdom of Spain compared to the kingdom of Portugal. In other words, the Jews who lived in the kingdom of Spain fled into the much smaller kingdom of Portugal. This resulted in a high concentration of Spanish Jews in Portugal, as the following reference reads. The number of those who were thus banished from Spain were 400,000 Jews, according to Rujlan and others. Mariana says, "'Tis not easy to reduce them to any certain number. Most writers affirm there were 170,000 families departed. Others say there were 800,000 persons, a prodigious number.
That's a lot of people, almost a million.
Some of them who were late in gathering together their effects and would not turn Christians were sold as slaves. And of those,
they were sold as slaves. Okay, these Jews, Portugal, sold as slaves. Remember that now.
Those who left their country, Scripture tells us, many died of the fatigues of traveling or the plague. After the Jews fled from Spain to Portugal in 1492, roughly 1 year later in 1493, Portugal expelled its Spanish-born Jews to West Africa. Years later, Portugal then expelled its Portuguese-born Jews to the west coast of Africa. The expulsion of the Jews from Portugal began under King John II. This is when the Red Dragon began to separate the children of Judah from their parents in order to create what's called the Christian slave.
Okay. Y'all have an idea how these people look? Let's go to oldest sources, okay? Oh, yeah. And you see here, the king had allowed Jewish refugees from Spain, from where they had been expelled in 1492, to remain in Portugal only in return for payment of an enormous ransom. In 1493, those who could not pay had their children taken away from them, baptized by force, and deported to Sao Tome or St. Thomas, West Africa, in order to be raised as Christians and to help populate the island that the king had just leased to Alvaro de Camina at an annual rent of 100,000 reis. Nothing is known of the further fate, although later chronicles attribute the thriving sugar production on the island to the talents of these deported children and their offspring. Let's get a little more information here. But let's just get an idea of these people, okay? Now, if you watch Hidden Colors, Tariq Nasheed, or you read that article from the Nation of Islam site, you would think that the Lancados were biracial. But okay, what is this book right here about this book? Okay, because I like going to older sources. Because see, they like changing things. Okay, now this here is just from 1922. From 1922, Africa and the Discovery of America Forward. Sources quoted: Leo Weiner, published by Innocent Sons, 1922. Page 110. Jobson describes these Lancados under the name of Portingales, like Portuguese Portingales. Okay, and this is his quote, from his writings. "I must break of a while from them and acquaint you first of another sort of people we find dwelling, or rather lurking, amongst these Mandingos, only some certain way up the river. And yeah, I noticed there is this MC Cham, like he'll say the only reason that the Igbo or you have light skinned Igbo in Nigeria, Africa, is because of the Portuguese. That's what he will claim. But how did these Portuguese actually look? Okay, we're talking about Lancados because people believe that there were white Jewish men in Portugal and they mixed with the blacks, and some people believe that. Okay, but how are the Lancados described? Okay, again. Okay, what a Negro tribe, and with the aid of these Lancados, the trade of our enemies is growing in Guinea, and ours is disappearing. Jobson described these Lancados under the name of Portingales. I must break of, okay, and this is a quote, I must break of a while from them and acquaint you first of another sort of people we find dwelling, or rather lurking amongst these Mandingos, only some certain way up the river. And these are, as they call themselves, Portingales, and some few of them seem the same. Others of them are mulattoes between black and white, but the most part as black as the natural inhabitants. So they saying most of these people were black. These Portuguese, most were black as the natural inhabitants, as the same as the people who were already in Africa. Did y'all get that? It says most of them. They said some were mulattoes. Okay, and that's because of the white Portuguese settlers in control. They end up hooking up with some of the women because there weren't Portuguese women there, white women there. So of course the men gonna have sex. It does not say that these Lancados were white at all. They're saying they're being described as either some of them were mulattoes between black and white, but the most part as black as the natural inhabitants. They are scattered, some 2 or 3 dwellers in a place, and all married, or rather keep with them the country black women, of whom they beget children. So they was hooking up with some of the women who were already in Africa, but they're saying here that most of them were black as the women that some of them were hooking up with, as the natural inhabitants. This is Africa and the Discovery of America, 4 words, sources quoted, The Sovereign Remedy, Bead Money, Leo Weiner, Ennis and Sons, 1922. Volume 2. Okay, here's more information. Okay, and let's go to some other sources. Now, I know we don't want to believe that there are some of our people who are traitors, but what you have to understand was that there were certain people from childhood sent to West Africa, bred. This was also about the manipulation of white racism. Yes, we did have some of our own people, as well as those who were Moors, which I will show, who were traitors to our people. Yes, I do know that they will do things like trying to create a buffer class of black people. And don't get me wrong, but we do have those black people who were traitors, but this was also about the manipulation. I'm not trying to take away responsibility either, but there were certain people from a young age who were bred to be traitors. Just like when I talk about there are certain people, spies, who were bred to be like under monarch, beta, MK Ultra programming, like some people even from birth, born to be spies and agents and almost like bred into that world. This is also like kind of in relation to mind control. This is a book here. The Inquisition Revealed in its origin, policy, cruelties, and human history, with memoirs of its victims in France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, England, India, and other countries. Okay, this is from Thomas Timpson. This is from 1851, I believe, published by Alot. This is from 1851. You got to go to these older sources. Now, this is on page 259, okay? Talking about auto de fe. Sufferers of the Inquisition. They were mostly colored men. What they mean by colored men? They're making a differentiation between the colored men and white people. They say they were mostly colored men, and there being only about 12 white persons amongst them. So they're making a differentiation from those who they referred to as colored and those they refer to as white. Why is that? Because when I think Portuguese people, don't you think white people? So why are they making the differentiation? Now, were they saying that these people were mixed? So they refer to Jewish people as colored people? Why do they refer to themselves as, why is the term Jewish used anyway? Ish is a suffix meaning like. I don't hear of any people in African tribes or groups, nations being referred to as ish, like Nigerian ish. That's like black ish. Maybe we are black ish. I think it's only in Europe that that suffix ish is used. Ish meaning like. It means like you're not really from Spain, but you're Spanish. You're Spain like. Why do they use that term ish, Jewish? Why is ish used? That's something to question, y'all. But anyways, it says they were mostly colored men. Like I'm talking about these particular prisoners. Mostly colored men. There being only about 12 white persons amongst them. They're making a differentiation. Now, did they call Jewish men colored? Okay. Yeah, and just so you know, it says here, and these are, as they called themselves, Portuguese, and some few of them seem the same. Others of them mulattoes between black and white, but the most part as black as the natural inhabitants. Okay. By the way, this book right here, The Negro in the New World by Sir Harry Hamilton Johnson. Now that may sound like a brother, but no, actually that's a British explorer. This is from 1910. Okay, showing right here the Negroid tribe of southern India. And this is someone from the Negroid Bush tribe of southern India, a Panian woman, a Quaker woman. But anyways, it says down here, the Jews are composed of 3 or 4 separate racial elements. The Asiatic Negroid strain shows itself occasionally in the curly hair, the long eye, and the proportions of the skull. The Jewish hybrids with the Negro in Jamaica and Guinea reproduce the most strikingly the Assyrian type. But you see here, the Jews are composed of 3 or 4 separate racial elements. The Asiatic Negroid strain. Okay, but let me make sure to bookmark this. I'm going to come back to this. The Critical Review or Annals of Literature, Volume 57 by Tobias Smollett. Okay, this is 1783. 1783. On page 141, it reads, King John II in 1492, okay, that was the same year that the Moors were defeated, right? Expelled all the Jews. And we're talking about Jews in Portugal. King John II in 1492 expelled all the Jews to the island of St. Thomas, or Sao Tome, West Africa, which had been discovered in 1471, and to other Portuguese settlements like Angola on the continent of Africa. And from these banished Jews, the Black Portuguese, as they are called, and the Jews in Luango, okay, like the Lancados that were already sent there, who are despised even by the very Negroes, are descended. They are descended from the Negroes. The banished Jews, the Black Portuguese, they're described as Black Portuguese, not even brown Portuguese. Why would they be referring to these people as Black? Could it be maybe they just got kind of dark skin? Maybe that's it. But look what it says here. Let's go down. By these colonists, St. Thomas, Sao Tome, soon became a considerable place of trade and valuable for its sugar plantations. 36 years after their settlements, not less than 156,000 robes of 30 pounds weight each of sugar were exported, and the engines of sugar, 60 sugar works turned by slaves. These Negroes, banished Jews, Black Portuguese, Negroes were purchased. And see, the reason we use the word Negro, it's a Portuguese word for Black. They called the ones who particularly came from Portugal, they eventually began calling them Negroes. That's why we didn't use that term. They went from calling them Jews to Negroes. Okay. These Negroes was purchased in Guinea, Congo, Manicongo, and the colonists had plantations furnished with from 150 to 3,000 Negro slaves. In the beginning of the 16th century, the Spaniards and Portuguese began to transport Negroes for similar labors to the West Indies, like Jamaica and all that, and Brazils. They spelled it with an S, Brazil, like South America. It says Brazils. Now, what other people were sent to Brazil and the West Indies to work as slaves? Do you think that it's the people that look like Barbra Streisand and Woody Allen? I don't think so. By which the Negro trade were rapidly increased. I didn't write this. This wasn't written by an Afrocentrist. Let's go to another source. Okay, Universal Classics Library, Volume 2, by Dunn, 1901. Page 281. Let me make sure to bookmark. On entering Portugal from Spain, the traveler is forcibly struck with the difference between the two countries. The dark eyes, the black hair, and brown complexion are the only traits of resemblance between the Portuguese and the Spaniards. Because you got to understand that they've been out of Spain now. They mostly now in Portugal, okay? So those left in Spain, they didn't probably mixed up and diluted, and they're probably, racially ambiguous by that time. So now the Negroes, they mainly in Portugal. They refer to as Jews. But anyways, the Portuguese have thick lips. Thick lips. The Portuguese have thick lips, noses, something of the Negro form, black, and often curly hair. And their features and above all, their hands show signs of the mixed blood. Now, when they're saying mixed blood, what do they mean by that? In Spain, the people, in spite of their dark complexion, say what? And eyes, have at least a European look. Because remember, they had been left Spain. So actually, the ones in Spain, although they're dark, they're mixed, but they have a European look. But these ones of Portugal, this is questionable, ain't it? Okay, let's go to another source. This is the Practical Reference Library, Volume 3. This is from 1908. Charles Herbert Sylvester, William Francis Rochelot, Dixon and Hance, published by Dixon, Hanson and Company, 1908. Okay, what page is this? They're not really showing the page, but it's like a dictionary. Just look it up. Okay, Jews, the name given to Hebrews after their return from their captivity in Babylon. They are religious people, fond of home, and in form and feature, they are short with dark hair and eyes, a swarthy complexion, full lips, and a characteristic nose. What is swarthy? Swarthy means dark skinned. And like swarthy, Schwartz means dark, swarthy, basically dark skin. People will try to say, well, maybe they mean olive skin. Well, only olives I know, for the most part, green or black. But they'll say, oh, olive skin, like a Mediterranean Italian, or like tall, dark, and handsome. They'll try to tell you that. When they said swarthy in the past, they meant basically brown, like chocolate, like brown skin, dark skin. Okay, swarthy complexion. Now, yeah, sometimes swarthy can be used if you're comparing one, like if you were comparing Jeff Goldblum to, let's say, an Anglo-Saxon, we could say that Jeff Goldblum was swarthy when you're making that comparison. But usually when they said in giving a description of a swarthy complexion, just like with the word Schwartz, like with Schwarzenegger, Schwartz means black. Okay? Just like Moore, Moreno, black. And see, it also says full lips and a characteristic nose. All that's left out is the description of the hair, or the description of the hair texture, although the hair is being described as being black or dark. But for y'all who ain't convinced, okay, stress this even more. Okay, narrow business. I can't read all of this, but Narrative of travels and discoveries in northern and central Africa in the years 1822, 1823, and 1824 by Major Denham, Captain Clapperton, and the late Dr. Odney, extending across the Great Desert to the 10th degree of northern latitude, blah, 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 blah. Published by authority of the Right Honorable Earl Bathurst by Major Dixon Denham and Captain Hugh Clapperton of the Royal Navy. Okay. Dixon Denham, 1826. And this is page 264. And it reads, I have read of you. You are better than Jews, said he. Are Jews white like you? No, I replied. Rather, more like yourself, very dark. Let's say what? Woody Allen? Say what? It didn't just say dark. It didn't just say swarthy. It said very dark. When I think mulattoes, I don't even think very dark. So, was the typical Lancado mulatto? Now, this is from Sources of History in the Pentateuch, if I'm saying that correctly. More than likely not. But 6 lectures delivered in Princeton Theological Seminary on the Stone Foundation, March 1882. Now, this was published 1883. Samuel Colcord Bartlett, published by A.D.F. Randolph. Okay, so it's from 1883, and this is on page 118. In regards to the human race, it has been shown abundantly and historically that each of the external differences often ceases to be characteristic. Thus, the black color is found not only in individuals as the Black Jews of Portugal, but in tribes as the Bicaris on the Red Sea, whose hair and character are perfectly Semitic. Okay, so we've been told that we're Hamitic and not Shemitic. Okay, so it says the black color found not only in individuals as the Black Jews of Portugal, but in tribes as the Bicaris or the Bisharis on the Red Sea. Now, who are the Bisharis? Okay, Bisharis or the Bishari tribe. The Wikipedia will tell you an ethnic group who live in parts of Northeast Africa. Okay, and so when they're shown images, and we want to go to some older images, it may be a little different today. Yeah, see, this don't look that old. That ain't old looking. See, they try to, that's them trying to make it like they're Caucasians. That's not a, yeah, let's go. Here we go. Bishari family, Egyptian village, the Bisharis. Yeah, with the Bejas, Beja. So they saying they're dark like the Bishari people. Even in looking at this black and white photo, you can see that these are people with a darker complexion. Now, most ADOS, that's like in our complexion range, ain't it? Because most of us, we're like brown to black. We're not as dark as those who are now living in the Sudan or the South Sudan now. We're not usually as dark as they, but we're around, like a lot of the people of Nigeria, Ghana, we're around that color. Those, those of us ADOS, yeah, we look around this color, don't we? Most black folks, we're around this color, ain't we? And those people are of North Africa. And so you got to understand the so-called Middle East is North Africa. Okay. Like I say, you got to go to the oldest sources. Spinoza, his life and philosophy. Frederick Pollock. This is published by C.K. Paul in 1880. Okay. From 1880, this is page 420. Okay, someone's being described here. As for his person, it was of middle size. He had good features in his face, skin somewhat black, black curled hair, long eyebrows, and of the same color, so that one might easily know by his looks that he was descended from the Portuguese Jews. They're continuously being described, these Portuguese Jews, as black. Okay. A New Voyage to Italy. This is the book here, A New Voyage to Italy, with curious observations on several other countries as Germany, Switzerland, Savoy, Geneva, Flanders, and Holland, together with useful instructions for those who shall travel thither. Like, this is a traveling guide. Volume 1, Issue 1. It's by Maximilian Misson, published by R. Bonwick, 1714, published in Europe. Okay, this is a traveler's guide. And this wasn't this like the early 1700s? So this is a very old source. Okay, and here on page 135, it says, "'Tis also a vulgar error that the Jews are all black, for this is only true of the Portuguese Jews." Okay. So the question is, okay, because you also have those who were referred to as Jews like in Germany, but if there is an original race for the Jews, who were the original Jews? The ones that they're talking about in Portugal, or the ones in Germany? But it says here, it's an error to think that the Jews are all black. Now, why would people think that the Jews were all black? See, now today we would say, oh, it's an error to think that the Jews are all white, because usually when you hear people say, refer to Jews or Jewish people, you usually think, white people that look like Barbara Streisand and Woody Allen. But back then they're saying it's a vulgar error that the Jews are all black, for this is only true of the Portuguese Jews. And it also says, who marrying always among one another. See, with them, with their people, they weren't for interracial relations or marrying outside of their people. I want you to remember this, because people will try to tell you that certain groups of people in sub-Saharan West Africa may have a lighter complexion than other groups of people in Africa because of racial mixing, like with the Portuguese. So remember that. It says, who marrying always among one another, being Semitic of Jews of Africa. Many of us, why do you think so many of us descend from Nigeria? We can trace our roots to Nigeria, and certain Bantu people of like Nigeria or Ghana or Cameroon. Why do you think so many of us, ADOS, when we get the DNA test, can trace to Nigeria? There's a reason for that, because there's a specific group of people who were taken into slavery. They knew who we were. We weren't just running around Africa the way that they'll make you believe. They knew exactly who they were enslaving. And was this so much a thing of Africans sold their own people? Was it really just the way that they put it to you? Do you honestly think a group of people, they're going to just straight up diminish their power like that, weaken the power they land, selling people in mass? Obviously, there was a different group of people in the African continent that the inhabitants who were there, perhaps Hamitic people or, other groups of Shemitic people, could not relate to. Okay, it says that just also it's a vulgar error that the Jews are all black, for this is only true of the Portuguese Jews, who marrying always among one another. You see, it said they were marrying always among one another, beget children like themselves, and consequently the swarthiness of their complexion is entailed upon their whole race, even in the northern regions. Okay, but they're saying that the Jews of Germany are different. Again, unlike the Moors, who were, with the harems, mixing in with the Turkic women. With the Jews, they weren't about the racial mixing, okay? I want you to remember that for a reason. The Races of Men by Robert Knox. The Races of Men, a Fragment by Robert Knox, published by H. Renshaw in 1850. Okay, this is under ethnology. Okay, on page 133, it reads, Okay, it seems to me indeed that almost every race shows, as it were, three forms of race which run into each other, connecting them possibly with others, so that this is not peculiar to the Jewish race. Of the first form, I need say little to you, begging you merely to recollect that the contour is convex, the eyes long and fine, the outer angles running toward the temples. The brow and nose apt to form a single convex line, the nose comparatively narrow at the base, but the eyes consequently approaching each other, lips very long. Correction, lips very full. Mouth projecting, that's prognathism. Chin small, and the whole physiognomy, when swarthy, as it often is, has an African look. So, in this 19th century publication, it states that the Jews, when swarthy, have an African look, not a look like Jeff Goldblum, not what you may consider a Mediterranean look today, but an African look. Oh, no, we not done. We not done about this book. The Earth and Its Inhabitants, West Africa by Elisée Reclus, published the Appleton 1892. Now, this is a geography book, okay? It's a geography book and it's teaching you. Okay, and what page is this here? 267. Okay, and talking about Dahomey. You know, Dahomey in Africa, West Africa, Dahomey, where it used to be called, like where Benin and Nigeria is. East of the Great Popo begins the Dahomey territory, guarded by the important town of Glewe, known to Europeans by the various names of Fida, Haveda, Ouida. Remember, think of the Ouida slave ships. They were named Ouida for the reason. And Ouida. The old writers, because you know, you have a YouTuber up in here and saying, "Oh no, it was named Zwida after a serpent, a snake." No, no, no. The old writers call it Judah, and its inhabitants were said to be Jews, while the neighboring river Alala, whose real name is Ephra, became the Euphrates. Okay, during the flourishing days of the slave trade, from 16 to 18,000 were annually transported from Ajuda or Ajuda. And isn't it interesting that in Spanish, y'all, this is just me talking, ayuda means help. And I found out also that Bantu means, like in an Indonesian language or Malay language, it means help. Isn't that interesting? Ayuda, Ajuda, as the Portuguese called this place, or Ajuda. Now it's called, in Benin, Nigeria, it's called Ouida. And you'll look it up in Wikipedia, Ouida, Benin. They'll say, oh, it's named after a bird. No, 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 no. And see, then they'll say the tutelar deity of Ouida is the snake, and its famous fetish temple is served by priestesses, young mothers, or sisters of serpents, recruited by the abduction of young girls on feast days. See, those are the Hamitic, other Hamitic nations in the continent of Africa, changing the meaning of Judah, or other Shemitic groups, or even something to do with the Israelite tribe of Dan, changing the meaning of the name of Judah. If you know the scriptures, you know what I'm talking about. Also know that the original name and meaning of Judah was changed by those who had conquest over the territory. Notice that it reads in the following paragraph, Ouida belongs by right of conquest to Dahomey since 1725, when it received its name of Glewe, or the farm, indicating the part it played in supplying the capital with provisions. So now it's written as Glewe or Guida or Fida or Zwida. But in the prior paragraph, it read, the old writers called it Judah, and its inhabitants were said to be Jews.